My mom and I have a lot of things in common, and we share many of them with her mother, too. We all have the same middle name. If my matrilineal name were a bit cooler than Darlene, I'd probably use it as a last name. We're the same height, we've had the same hair color, and sometimes I can feel my mom's facial expressions slide across my face. My mom tells me that the women in our family have sexy legs until the day we die, or she would tell me that if she used words like sexy. It's usually shapely or fetching. We cry easily, we take things literally, and we do not like to talk about our feelings. We were all also raised Mormon, and we all stayed in bad marriages longer than we should, though each generation has managed to leave a little bit earlier and with a little bit more volition. My grandmother married my grandfather when she was 16, and she bore him 9 children. He convinced her early in their marriage that her Jack Mormon family was actually full of terrible sinners and she should have nothing to do with them, so she didn't. As she lived, her life got smaller and smaller. His dreams became her dreams to the exclusion of any hopes or desires of her own. He could have a rich, full life, and she could have him. And her children, of course. After they were grown, her small circle of interest waned even further. They stayed in small-town Wyoming, very small-town Wyoming. They got their mail general delivery at the nearest general store. And her dementia increased at the same pace as his deafness. For the last 10 years of her life, there was no way to tell them new information because she couldn't hear it, and because he couldn't hear it, and she wouldn't remember it. Religion was the organizing force of my grandparents' lives. They weren't fundamentalist Mormons, but they were hardline Mormons. I'll give you an example. Every year, on the 23rd of December, we gathered at their place for Joseph Smith's birthday dinner, an event some ex-Mormons call Smithmas. It was a night around the fire in their small high mountain cabin in the family compound in the mountains of Wyoming. And we'd all go around the room and tell the favorite things we had about Joseph Smith and what we liked most about him. The evening always concluded with angel food cake and a rendition of the happy birthday song to Joseph and Jesus. Every year, my grandmother, in her large glasses and floral dresses, looked smaller and smaller. And every year, she'd come up to me and tell me that I was a good girl and ask how the college I'd gone to many years before was. I was frozen in her mind at age 19. When she died a year ago, my mom was there to comfort her. Despite her long-professed desire to die first, she was so scared at the end. My grandfather kept coming in and saying helpful things like, "Don't be scared, you're going to see God soon." He didn't get it. My grandmother was convinced that she, who had consecrated her life in service to the church, had been a bad girl, and she was terrified to the end. The church she served convinced her that she was fundamentally broken and then was unable to fulfill a promise of redemption and forgiveness. When you convince people that wanting things is bad, there is no amount of prayer or passivity that will make up for it. Despite her life of obedience, she did not think that she had done enough for God to love her. My grandfather's cheerful, "Say hi to Joseph Smith for me," was the only comfort he had for her as she died. I think the only path that she saw out of her marriage was to die. My mom married my dad when she was 20, and she bore him 4 children, 1 brother older than I am, 2 brothers younger. She immediately dropped out of college to put him through his bachelor's and then 2 master's degrees. Have you reread The Little House on the Prairie recently? It's more than just well-written kitchen porn. Pa is a feckless wanderer who keeps uprooting Ma and making her start over in new and isolated places. Sure, he's charismatic, but he can't stick to anything. By the time I was 12, I had lived in 8 different houses in 5 different cities and 4 different states. We weren't a military family. My dad just liked to move, or rather, the Holy Ghost kept telling my father to move. My dad was rude to my mom. He would insult the way she looked, and he was unpredictably belligerent and explosive to the children, particularly me, because my dad has problems with women. I overheard him when I was 15 telling my brothers that deep down inside, all women are manipulative. I asked if that included me, and he said, "Only in the nicest way," which was actually not a nice thing to say. at all. He traveled a lot, though, and that helped my mom stay in the marriage. She found that she liked him better when he was away. Shortly after my youngest brother moved out, they moved from Wyoming to Salt Lake City at my father's behest. A little while after they moved, and a little bit before their 33rd wedding anniversary, he came home to tell her that he had met someone else. They had not kissed yet, but they were going to move to Santa Fe together. And also, he would like to stay married to my mother and come on romantic stays with her a couple times a year. My mother tossed him a suitcase and told him to get out. Yes, yay. When my father tells this story, it's my mother who wanted to end their marriage. She didn't have the option to continue as it had been, but when faced with being cast as the mistress instead of the wife, she found an insult that she would not put up with, and she walked away. I married my ex-wife when I was 21. I met her when I was 20, and she was 31, so 11 years of age difference. I'm about 30 now, and the idea of dating a 19-year-old fills me with a nameless terror. No, thank you. Please. There, of course, are many good age gap relationships, particularly as both parties are a little bit further from their teens. But if you are 31 and you are cruising someone just out of their teens, something is deeply wrong. I did not know that then, though. See, I thought that marrying a woman would be enough to break my family curse. My mother and grandmother had married men. That was clearly the problem. I had left the church and married a woman. Really, though, the gender was the only difference. I married much too young, and I married the first person I dated. I may have left the church, but the tools I had to make a marriage work were the ones that I learned there. To be honest with y'all, marrying an unkind woman was not much of an upgrade over marrying an unkind man. I won't lie to you and pretend it was zero upgrade. There's no unplanned pregnancies. Lots of women internalize their anger, so most of the time her violence was pointed at herself instead of at me. Most of the time. The first time we had sex, the first time I had sex ever, she was nice to me. I didn't get off, but we did some things that made me feel good. And I did not know that that was a one-time thing. I always thought we'd kind of get back to that, but we never did. If I asked her for anything, she would make it hurt, or we would just not have sex for months. So I learned not to ask, which was a theme in our marriage. The first time I had a need, she would be happy and considerate and kind. And anytime I needed that again, she would make me regret asking. The first time we broke up, it was because she realized that she was straight. If you would do the math on that with me for a moment, how could that be the first time? Well, as soon as we broke up, we started having sex again, and we got back together about a year later. I immediately realized I'd made a terrible mistake. I should have let the dumping stick. You should always let the dumping stick, but I don't like to lose. I was determined to make her love me again, and I succeeded, all without ever asking myself if that was something that I actually wanted. By the time I did, it was too late. My mom and grandmother were still married at that time, and I had learned well from them that you pick a person, and sure, nobody is perfect, and you're going to have to put up with things in any marriage, and you swallow it all, and you make that marriage work. I was in my last year of undergraduate and working 30 hours a week, studying for the GRE and applying to grad schools. She had dropped out of her last year of undergraduate and was not working. She spent most of her time drinking vodka and smoking spice in her bedroom, listening to Regina Spektor at top volume and breaking things. I found out later that she cheated on me during this time period because I wasn't paying her enough attention. Luckily, she broke up with me again, and we continued to live together for 9 months, like the pair of lesbians we were. I eventually left for graduate school. My grandmother's only path out of marriage was to die, and my mother left after 33 years and intense provocation. I had just been dumped twice. That's hardly brave or courageous. But when she wanted to get back together a year later, I said no. That's practically a Medal of Honor level of courage in my family. I imagine that if I had a daughter, she'd improve on my record by leaving her terrible fiancé instead of her terrible spouse, but I'm not having a daughter. My matrilineal name will die with me. I'm not passing on the winsome legs or tendency to cry. I'd like to believe that if my grandmother could know that her daughter and granddaughter found a different way out of their marriages, she'd be happy. But my mom's happy now, and so am I, and that'll have to be enough. Thank you.